Hello and welcome to Psyched, the show where we explore psychedelics through social, economic, and political perspectives. For our next speaker, we have Sean McAllister, who will be talking on review of decriminalization and legalization efforts around psilocybin in the US. Sean McAllister is one of nation's leading drug policy reform lawyers. In 2004, after working for the Colorado Attorney General's office for several years, Sean opened a solo law practice focused on criminal defense and represented hundreds of people charged with state and federal drug crimes. That same year, he founded the drug policy reform nonprofit Sensible Colorado. Sean served as the chair of the board of directors of Sensible Colorado, while the organization co-chaired the Colorado recreational marijuana legalization campaign that voters passed in 2012. Sean has also worked on broader drug policy reform issues as a member of the Colorado Commission on Criminal and Juvenile Justice. Today, Sean's law firm, McAllister Garfield, PC, has 15 lawyers in 4 states working primarily on cannabis business law and licensing matters. As part of his work, Sean's firm has sued regulators numerous times under the Administrative Procedures Act, petitioned the DEA to reconsider a harmful CBD rule, and represented Native American tribes attempting to participate in the cannabis and hemp industries. In addition to cannabis, Sean is the General Counsel to the Decriminalize Denver campaign and an appointed member of the Denver Psilocybin Mushroom Policy Review Panel, which is the first ballot initiative in the US designed to remove criminal penalties for the possession of psilocybin. Sean also acted as a legal advisor to the Decriminalize California campaign, which is seeking to decriminalize and regulate psilocybin mushrooms by ballot initiative in California in 2020. Sean is a member of Chacruna's Council for the Protection of Sacred Plants and Chacruna's co-General Counsel. Sean, thank you so much for coming on and welcome to Psyched.
Hey, good afternoon. Thank you for having me. It's nice to be here. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Greetings from the free state of Colorado. Here in the land of the Ute, the Cheyenne, the Kiowa, the Arapaho, and the Crow. Colorado has long been a crossroads for many people, and it has fulfilled a role as a leader in drug policy for many years, and I'm very honored to be part of this incredible community in Denver and in Colorado, and send greetings to everyone around the US and around the world. Thanks for being here and listening in to my talk. So sorry about that long entry there, but I have been working on drug policy a long time, since the mid-90s. And particularly with regard to psychedelics, I really, after a lifetime of experimentation and adult use and quasi-spiritual religious practice, I really came back to psychedelics several years ago, looking for help with personal trauma and mental health issues, some issues around my family. And, like a lot of people in this movement, I had a profound spiritual experience and healing experiences around ayahuasca, 5-MeO-DMT, other entheogens and psychedelics, and really recommitted myself to the broader vision of drug policy reform. Beyond cannabis, which of course I'm passionate about cannabis, and we're making lots of progress, and in some ways not progress with cannabis. So psychedelics really presents a new opportunity at drug policy reform, part of this intergenerational move away from tough on crime to smart on drug use, treating drug use and abuse as a public health issue, not a criminal justice issue. That's who I represent, is that part of that intergenerational struggle. And it's been a real honor for me to participate in the movement over the years. And as the introduction said, I helped draft the Amendment 64 cannabis legalization initiative. My day-to-day law practice now, in addition to cannabis, I'm consulting with groups looking for religious exemptions under the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. I'm consulting with psychedelic assisted counselors and therapists who are trying to help individuals with psychedelics. I'm talking to entrepreneurs who want to start up companies around psilocybin and decriminalize cities like Denver and Oakland. So I'm advising people on the laws in these cities. I'm talking to event coordinators who want to have events where people maybe bring psychedelics and advising them on the risk of those kind of behaviors. And so I've really been fortunate to have a broad exposure to a lot of areas of interest here. And as the introduction said, I'm really proud to be part of the Chacruna Institute for Plant-Based Medicines, which is Bia Labache's group. And I serve on her Council for Protection with Sacred Plants. We're working on things like writing amicus briefs in legal cases where people are seeking religious exemptions for psychedelic use. So again, I wanted to give everybody a sense that I have a really broad background on this topic, but I will be talking today about the decriminalization initiatives around the country. And so we're going to cover Denver, Oakland, Santa Cruz, Oregon, the California initiative, and a couple other things. It's going to be a lot of material in a short amount of time. So I hope everybody has their seatbelts on and is ready for a lot of information here. But seriously, if you do want more information or want to follow up with me after this talk, look at McAllisterGarfield.com, McAllister, McAllisterGarfield.com is my website, and you can find out more about me or just Google Sean McAllister, SEAN, Sean McAllister. Okay, so as I said, Denver's been a leader, and in the spring of 2019, we led again. Kevin Matthews and Matthew Duffy and other activists in Denver, Cindy Sovine, several people came together a couple years ago and said, why not psilocybin mushrooms, and put together a ballot initiative. I ended up supporting the campaign through the end of the election run up until the election day, and have been honored to become their attorney. And so the Denver voters in May of last year, by the narrowest of margins, I think it was 50.2% to 49.8%, by a couple thousand votes out of 150,000 votes cast, we decriminalized personal possession, cultivation, and storage of psilocybin mushrooms in Denver. And that was the first of its kind in the U.S. And it was quickly followed by Council initiative that also decriminalized all entheogens, and I'll be talking about Oakland here in a minute. But Denver was the first, and I think there's a little bit of misperception about what we did. Decriminalization is not legalization. It just means that it is the lowest law enforcement priority of the city of Denver to enforce against personal possession, cultivation, and storage of psilocybin mushrooms. It doesn't mean it's totally legal, but the good thing is the initiative took all funding away from the city, saying you cannot spend $1 enforcing psilocybin laws in the city of Denver. So that's a city law. It's not a state law. It's not a federal law. So it still remains illegal under state law in Colorado. It remains illegal under federal law, of course. I did want to mention federal law. We live in an environment with the most ridiculous designation for all psychedelic medicines or psychedelic substances. All of them essentially the classic psychedelics, LSD, mushrooms, MDMA, all the classic psychedelics are Schedule I drugs, which means they have no medical benefit and they have a high potential for addiction. This is just the total Alice in Wonderland, bizarro designation of these substances, because of course they have medical benefit and they're not addictive. So I just have to give a little dig at the federal law that is really a vestige of 1950s mentality and evidence of the gridlock in our Congress, that we still have these type of laws on the books and this lack of science-based reality. So my point here is that Denver decriminalized something at the city level. It's not legal at the state or federal level. In fact, there's very serious penalties at the federal level. There's serious penalties at the state level. But the good news is nobody's been prosecuted in Denver since the initiative passed in May of 2019. There were By the way, it only decriminalized for adults and not for juveniles. And there have been a couple juveniles detained in Denver since the initiative on suspicion of possession or cultivation of, I think it was possession of psilocybin, but they ultimately were not charged. So it did not decriminalize for juveniles, but there haven't been any arrests really. There was one guy that came out after Denver passed its initiative and said, "Oh, this is great. Now when I possess some, I'm going to grow it, I'll possess it, and they can't charge me. And then I'll give it to somebody and get paid, and I'll distribute it. And they can't charge me there because they'll walk in and he'll be possessing it, I'll be possessing it, everybody's legal." Well, that's the one part of the law that is not very clear. Can you share psilocybin mushrooms in the city of Denver? There's actually a state law that makes it a felony to share a Schedule I controlled substance. It's a lower level felony compared to others, but it's still a felony. So my point here is that we really just decriminalize cultivation for personal use, personal possession, and storage for personal use. We didn't legalize distribution or sharing or decriminalize those activities. It's really a narrow set of things that's been decriminalized. So this individual came out and said, "I'm going to just give it to everybody, it'll be fine." He actually was raided by the federal government on a search warrant investigating his activity. Of course, he was putting a brand on his psilocybin mushrooms. He spoke kind of freely about who he is in this newspaper article. So very reckless, careless behavior. Did end up in a raid on somebody's home, but nobody got charged. So far, he's not been charged with a crime. So again, the story is nobody's been charged. We've decriminalized it. I participate on the Denver mayor's psilocybin mushroom policy review panel. And the intent of that panel is to make sure the city is living up to the spirit of the law. And we really are very fortunate. You know, in 2005, we decriminalized cannabis in the city of Denver, and I was part of that effort as well. And the DA immediately came out and said, "Oh, we don't care if you did that in Denver. It's still against state law, and we have to enforce state law." They really actively fought against cannabis decriminalization in 2005. Just shows you how much things have changed. Now, of course, cannabis businesses are essential businesses during the COVID crisis. But in contrast to that negative reaction in 2005, we actually have had full support of the city attorney's office, the district attorney of Denver, the mayor's office. They have lived up to the intent of this law and not prosecuted anybody on psilocybin since this law passed. So this is a huge piece of progress here, essentially leaving people alone. It didn't decriminalize public use, by the way. It didn't decriminalize if you want to import ayahuasca from Peru. You still could see Customs and Border Patrol interference or federal government interference with that activity. So we need to be clear that Denver's decriminalization is somewhat narrow. It doesn't just open the door for any potential activity around psilocybin, but the core things of people cultivating, possessing, consuming, and storing psilocybin mushrooms have been decriminalized in Denver, and it feels really good. I have many friends who are actually cultivating psilocybin now because the fear is gone of prosecution. So that's the situation in Denver. The panel, I was talking about the panel, what we're doing is looking at ways to push the progress even farther. And so that means we're looking at training police and first responders on how to deal with people using psychedelics in general and psilocybin in particular. So a lot of harm reduction work is going into the Denver review panel. Oh geez, I should have turned my phone off here. It just keeps going off. So let me turn that off. But in addition to harm reduction efforts, we're also looking at potentially making Denver a hub for psilocybin research and finding ways that we can support researchers and clinical studies or observational studies under FDA rules in the city of Denver, given this decriminalization. The panel is also looking at public service announcements co-branded with the city of Denver and advocacy organizations like SPORE Kevin Matthews, one of the founders of the Denver Initiative, has the Society for Psychedelic Outreach, Education and Reform, Reform and Education, spore.org. Check it out. And so maybe SPORE would co-sponsor some PSAs with the city. Maybe other organizations like the Zendo Project would do that. And we're also looking at ways to potentially recommend changes to Denver city law to create more protections. Maybe there should be sites in the city where people are able to use psychedelics with immunity and not have to worry about getting prosecuted. A safe place in Denver for people to gather who want to use psychedelics. I mean, nothing has been decided, and I'm not here on behalf of the panel officially. I'm a member, but I don't speak on behalf of the panel. So those are the kind of things that the panel is looking at. And we're also writing a report in Denver on the effects of decriminalization that will be published in January of 2021. And we believe that will be a great asset to reform advocates. You know, we know that the Decriminalize Nature and SPORE and other groups have been spawning initiatives in over 100 cities across the US. And we think the report from Denver, if you decriminalize, nothing changes in your city. You don't see any noticeable decrease in public safety. You don't see any noticeable increase in public intoxication. You know, there is a culture in the US around psychedelic use. Most people use it safely at home, or people go to concerts, but hopefully they're taking Uber or having a designated driver drive. My point here is that there is a culture around it. It doesn't tend to involve stumbling through the streets unattended. It's not a very common way for people to enjoy it. So we're hoping that this report from Denver will be a great benefit to other advocates around the country and help them decriminalize in their cities. All right, I've spent a lot of time on Denver. We're already halfway through, so let me kind of rush through some of the other municipalities, and then I'll talk about the state initiatives that are out there. Oakland deserves tons of credit, just like Denver. Oakland has been a longtime leader in reform, whether it's police misconduct reform or drug policy reform. You know, of course, medical cannabis really had its birth in the Bay Area in the late 90s. So I'm a California lawyer also. It is my second home. It is my second state. I love California. Our offices are in Los Angeles, actually, in California, but it's a very special, near to my heart place. And it is the birthplace of the drug revolution in the 60s. It's the birthplace of the cannabis reform in the 90s. So Oakland stepped up and, you know, assumed its rightful place as a reform advocate. And a month or two after Denver's initiative, they decriminalized all entheogens in Oakland. So Oakland really deserves the credit. They've gone the farthest here. It's all entheogens. It's not just cultivation, possession, and storage like Denver. It's all those things, plus distribution, plus all entheogens, not just psychedelics, all natural-based psychedelic medicines. So this would not include MDMA or LSD in the city of Oakland. Entheogen is a natural occurring substance. So pharmaceutical or man-made chemicals are not covered by Oakland's initiative, but in other respects, they went much farther. You know, 5-MeO-DMT from toad medicine, peyote, which is a controversial topic, and Oakland has taken some heat for that. But the point is, all the naturally occurring substances in cactuses, in plants, coming from animals, they are all decriminalized in the city of Oakland for possession, cultivation, storage, distribution. And, you know, this piece about distribution has already created speakeasies in the city, at least one speakeasy in the city of Oakland, where you can go in, give a donation, and you'll get psilocybin. This is a controversial topic. I have great friends like James Anthony in Oakland, and you know, friendly with the Decriminalize Nature folks, Carlos and Larry, and of course my organization Chacruna with Bia Labache is based in the Bay Area, and my great friend Bob Otis Stanley and the Sacred Garden community. You know, again, the list goes on and on, but this is controversial because I know the community's priorities in Oakland are, let's allow communities to define for themselves what this means. And a lot of the people that have reached out to me want to come in and do commercial activity in the city of Oakland. And I think it's true that you could, for example, cultivate mushrooms in the city of Oakland and distribute them. And that wouldn't be by itself a crime within the city of Oakland. It's a decriminalized matter. They can't spend any money on enforcing in Oakland, but it still is against state law, federal law. And so I think there's a lot of concern that those kind of distribution activities would trigger potentially a state or federal intervention. And we need to be very careful about that. People that are out there offering psilocybin for trade or for donation, you just have to understand that you're in the gray zone, you're in the risky area, and you could find yourself getting in trouble. But we will see how the Oakland scenario unfolds and what is allowed and what's not. So far, like Denver, there have been no new arrests in Oakland since the initiative passed. And so this is a revolutionary law, and Carlos and Larry and Bob Otis and all these folks deserve so much credit. Kufi Kiri and so many people in Oakland deserve so much credit for the work they've done. And it's still remains to be seen how it will play out, but it is just getting started. Okay, one quick word about Santa Cruz. Santa Cruz is all entheogens. It's cultivation, it's possession, but it's not distribution. None of these, so that's quickly on Santa Cruz. I love a great friend, Sasha Brodsky in Santa Cruz. Hi, Sasha, you're probably not watching, but love Santa Cruz, great surf town, great town. But none of these initiatives set a limit on personal possession. So that's another unknown, is how much can you possess in Denver, Oakland, or Santa Cruz? It's not defined. Police have said to us they're looking for indicia of distribution to determine, are you possessing for personal use or are you trying to distribute? So if you harvest a great big amount, you might have enough for a year's supply out of one harvest. That could be, a pound, 2 pounds. I don't know what you might need for a year, but that might look like a distribution amount to police, but it certainly would look more like distribution if you had scales, baggies. Of course, people that want to use it for personal use need a scale too. But my point is, those are the things law enforcement are looking at to determine if this is really a crime or it should be prosecuted or not. And again, in Oakland, you can distribute, so maybe it's not an issue in Oakland, but just wanted to mention the lack of a personal possession amount. Okay, the Oregon initiative, it's the most important initiative this year with 8 minutes left. I-34 is an initiative that would not just decriminalize, it would actually legalize, tax, and regulate psilocybin mushrooms in Oregon and create treatment centers. It's not quite a medical model because the treatment center is run by a provider. The provider will be licensed by the Oregon Health Authority. I'm just thinking my firm has a lawyer licensed in Oregon, and we expect to be working in the Oregon market. But the point here is that it does create this provider model. You have to go to a center, consume it there, supervised in your use, and then you're let go. You're not supposed to possess it outside of the center. You're not supposed to grow it at home. The center would do all that work for you. So that's controversial. Some people are upset about it because it doesn't broadly decriminalize home possession, cultivation. But there's a separate Drug Policy Alliance initiative in the state of Oregon this year that if that passes, it's called the DATRA, or the Drug Addiction Reform and Treatment Act. Anyways, if that Drug Policy Alliance full decriminalization for all drugs, if that passes and I-34 passes, then you would have the ability to cultivate and possess psilocybin at home, and you could go get psilocybin at these treatment centers. It's the most important initiative, and it's the first ever statewide initiative. It looks like it's going to make the ballot. I really encourage you to go to the campaign website, contribute to that campaign. There are flaws with it. I was going to give you the website here in a second, but there are flaws with it. But on whole, I think it deserves to be supported, and let's try to get it done this year. The website is Yes on IP34. YESONIP34. Yes on IP34.org. So please go to that website. They still need more signatures. If you have anybody that could sign, please do have them sign the petitions and then support that initiative financially. Go to chacruna.net, CHACRUNA, chacruna.net. This is our website where you can find a huge volume of information about my articles on decriminalization are all on there, and a bunch of very important issues around psychedelics are covered in scholarly articles on chacruna.net. So these are, go to spore.org, chacruna.net, yes on IP34.org, and you got plenty of work ahead of you. I want to thank the Psyched crew for putting this together. It's quite an interesting format here over 2 weeks. I haven't been able to catch all the talks, but they certainly brought together a lot of great people, and I hope you enjoyed the conversation. And so I guess we're here at the 5-minute mark for Q&A. Am I supposed to answer any questions, or you're going to give me the questions? Fine.
Yeah, I can ask you a couple. Thank you so much, Sean. Really appreciate it. Really great summary. And thank you for sticking to the time limit. I know there's quite a lot to talk about. So let's start with one of the audience questions asking, can you comment on the legal pathways for clinicians in the US to access psilocybin? Will they cultivate themselves initially? And the second question, do you think there will be a legal pathway for microdosing, minimum concentrations of the psychedelic molecule similar to 0.3% THC, or is any trace substance illegal?
Perfect. That's one of the issues I didn't reach because I am consulting with therapists looking to do psychedelic assisted therapy. Right now, there is only one legal way in the US for therapists to provide psychedelics to clients, and that is through the clinical trials around MDMA, cannabis, or psilocybin. Obviously, cannabis is not really psychedelic, but there are FDA-approved clinical trials through Johns Hopkins, through other research institutes, with Compass, with all these organizations you've heard about. And you would have to sign up for that clinical trial and be certified to actually administer through that process. Otherwise, you do run a risk, and this is what I've been consulting with people about. You know, therapists are licensed by state regulatory agencies. They tend to have a standard rule saying you have to abide by the standard of care, which usually means not providing something illegal to somebody. So on the spectrum of what therapists can do, you have preparation. Somebody comes to you and says, I want to do psychedelics. You could certainly prepare them for that. But by you recommending them to do psychedelics, you might be crossing a line. So that's a fuzzy area. Then there's the actual use of the psychedelic. And again, unless you're in a clinical trial, providing it could be risky. Certainly, it could be seen as distribution. And then, so that's that's probably one of the riskiest areas. And then you have a very low risk area on integration work. Once your patient has done psychedelics, you could certainly talk to them about the experience, try to integrate, understand what they experience. That's probably the safest thing. Anything on preparation or use is risky, especially if you're the one suggesting it or providing it. So that was the answer to the first part of the question. The second one was, do we think there'll be the equivalent of microdosing for psychedelics like CBD?
Yeah, exactly. Kind of comparable to the 0.3% THC that we see in cannabis.
You know, that's, again, subject to clinical trials. I want to mention that we think that psilocybin and MDMA will be approved by FDA for certain indications in the next couple of years. And so that will have a dose and a regimen and a standard, protocol around it. But there's nobody that I know right now that is seeking FDA approval for microdosing. And I love listening to a lot of these clinicians. They're like, microdosing is interesting, but what we're really interested in is a significant dose and what the effects that has. I do want to mention on the microdose issue that ketamine is also another currently legal option for doctors and others to be prescribing. And ketamine is used in a microdose setting in the therapeutic setting. So there is a little bit of that, but there's no like FDA approved microdose regime right now. That's still years out.
Mm-hmm. The other question that I wanted to ask focuses on technology and platforms in the space that are possibly giving a foundation for the gray market and the illegal market to be able to showcase. I was hoping you could talk about that, especially with weed maps and everything that's kind of been going on with them over the last year. What does that look like for the psychedelic space? What are the boundaries and barriers?
So yeah, that's a great question. I know we're running out of time, so I'll try to give 30 seconds. People have asked me about that, and what is legal to advertise right now would be ketamine therapy, would be events that are friendly to psychedelics. But people have called me and said, can I have a website? I guess I shouldn't say the idea, but can I have a website that brings people together around psychedelics? The problem is criminal law says to help somebody else violate the law is just like violating the law itself. So you can be an accessory or complicit to a crime if you promote somebody's event where everybody's doing psychedelics or distributing psychedelics. That's a risky area. So that's why being in decriminalized cities is less risk. Getting your city to decrim, and then you can make decisions on how much risk you want. But other than the pharmaceutical route right now, there's no area of psychedelics that has no risk.
Mm-hmm, definitely. Well, Sean, thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate your insights and perspectives.
All right, thanks for having me. Good luck.
Looking forward to talking soon. Bye-bye.